Ena mana, ena reo, ena karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Namaste, ni hao, salam alaikum, and greetings in all the other wonderfully diverse languages of New Zealand. Welcome all to the Meet the Ethnic Women Candidates, New Zealand Elections 2020, where we spend the next hour and a half, minus 5 minutes, talking to women candidates contesting in this year's elections who are defined as ethnic. Ethnic here, we refer to those who identify as not being Māori, not Pākeha, and not Pacifica. Before I get underway, I would like to introduce myself. I am Rachel Simon Kumar. I teach at the University of Auckland in the School of Population Health. And with me, I have Priya Kurian and Erica Lee. Priya?
Kia ora, everyone. I'm Priya Kurian. I'm Professor of Political Science and Public Policy here at the University of Waikato. Erica.
Kia ora, everyone. My name is Erica Lee, and I'm a graduate teaching assistant in the Sociology Department at University of Auckland, and part of this project as a research assistant.
Even an election ago, we would not have considered a special webinar on ethnic women in politics. But in just the last 3 years, there have been tremendous changes globally and also in New Zealand. In the US, for instance, the US Democratic Vice Presidential candidate is Kamala Harris, who identifies as Black and Asian. We have, within the Tory government in the UK, we have Priti Patel, who is Secretary of State, a very senior position. Then there's Nikki Haley, who's a prominent figure in the Republican Party, and the Squad also in the US, in AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. The list of names go on and on. In our own way in New Zealand, as we are seeing a similar seismic, if small, shifts as well. 2 to 3 elections ago, we would have been lucky to see a handful of ethnic women stand for elections, and even fewer actually enter parliament. In the last elections, that's the 2017 elections, we actually had 5 women of ethnic minority backgrounds in parliament, which is quite a significant achievement. This year, from our team's count, there were at least 19 women candidates who note in their profiles that they belong to one of the many Asian, Latin American, and Middle Eastern identities in New Zealand. 19 women. Talk about a seismic shift. What do ethnic women politicians bring to New Zealand politics? How difficult or easy is it to be an ethnic woman in politics? How do they fit their politics between their party's priorities, their community's interests, and also their identities as women, and possibly also as feminists? What can we expect from ethnic women in parliament, and how might their presence benefit ethnic women in the community? The Ethnic Women in Politics webinars are run over 2 days, today and tomorrow, to discuss precisely these questions. Today's is a conversation with first-timers vying to enter parliament. And tomorrow we talk to seasoned ethnic women in politics who are standing for re-election. These webinars are part of a larger 3-year study research project that's funded by the Royal Society of New Zealand's Marsden Fund that looks at barriers to and opportunities for ethnic women to enter politics in New Zealand. Today and tomorrow's panels are an opportunity to raise questions about ethnicity and identity, politics, aspirations and visions, the impact that ethnic women make in politics, as much as their fears and their disappointments. As university researchers, you might find that our webinar debates will be somewhat different from what you are used to seeing on television. There will be less of adversarial sparring style of debates here, even though some of our questions could be considered slightly provocative. Our aim is, and we are hoping that there are ethnic women in the audience today, our aim is that these sessions will help to bring a more informed understanding of the issues that face ethnic women today. Before I start the webinar, a few webinar protocols. Priya and I will be taking turns asking questions. We'll share that between us. This we anticipate will take about 1 hour. There will then be about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A, which will be led by Erica. Some protocols about how this webinar functions, especially for those who are new to webinar technology, and that actually includes me as well. We the panelists and the co-hosts cannot see the audience, and unfortunately the audience cannot verbally contribute to the discussion as well. There is, however, a Q&A box, question and answer box. If you were to hover your cursor, you will see a Q&A box. You can type in your questions into this box, and this will be seen by the co-hosts. You can ask questions at any time in the webinar, not just at the end of our questions. You don't have to wait till the end. You also have an option to ask your questions anonymously. Erica will pick a selection of questions depending on time and ask them on your behalf. For those of you who are asking questions, might I please ask that the questions are brief? Thank you. Good to see you, Zara. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Sorry, I'm on my way to Dunedin, so I'm in the car. My dad just took over. So.
Right. I'm just introducing the seminar webinar just a minute more, and then we'll introduce each one of you to the webinar. For the audience, might I ask that questions are brief and that they are questions, try to avoid commentaries, and ideally not too personalized. We are trying to address some of the broader issues that face us in politics. To all the panelists, we do have a range of issues and we are excited to raise these issues with you. So we ask that you are succinct as much as possible so we can make our way through some of these questions as planned. Erica has a banner with a clock image on it. Do you have that, Erica? When you see the sign, it just means you have about 30 minutes to wrap up with the answers. And a final comment.
30 seconds, Rachel.
30 seconds.
To me, yes. A final comment in order, 30 seconds, did I say more than that? Sorry, 30 seconds to wrap up. A final comment, in order to progress the conversations, we will not be using titles or any other honorific names or titles for you. We'll just be using your, or surnames even. We will just be addressing you by your first name. We hope that's all right with you, each one of you. And with that, I would like to invite Priya to introduce the panelists and start the questions.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everyone. It's absolutely fantastic to have so many of you joining us today. And as Rachel's introduction just indicated, we have a really exciting lineup of 4 young ethnic women who are candidates for this time's elections. So let me get straight into introducing these 4 wonderful women. I'll start with Rimu Bhui, candidate for Hamilton East for the Green Party. From Palmerston North and raised in India, Rimu is currently in her 2nd year of studying languages and linguistics at the University of Waikato. She identifies as Pākeha and Tō Iwi, her whakapapa, tracing back to India, Scotland, and Ireland. Queer, disabled, and a woman of color, Rimu has a strong background in community social activism. Our second panelist is Nuwanti Samarakone, candidate for Manurewa for the National Party. Born in Sri Lanka, Nuwi moved to New Zealand as a teenager, having spent her early childhood in Scotland. Having studied health management, followed by a career in entrepreneurship, Nuwi is the founder of ICE, Inspire, Create, and Engage, a consultancy firm specializing in designing, developing, and delivering schemes for organizations looking to build talent pipelines for the future. Our third panelist is Kiara Swords, candidate for Whangarei for the Top Party. Born in the UAE to a Filipino mother and an Irish father, Kiara moved to Aotearoa at the age of 5, currently studying public policy at Victoria University with an undergraduate background in economics. She's passionate about issues of inequality and creating economic prosperity for all New Zealanders. And our final panelist for today is Zahra Hussaini, candidate for Christchurch for the Labour Party. Coming from a big Afghan family, Zahra moved to Christchurch at the age of 12, an active member of the Muslim community and a past councillor and community board member candidate for the Waimarie ward. Zahra is a co-founder of Uniting Canterbury Women, an organization for the well-being and community building among Wahine in the Canterbury region. She is also a trained lab technician, research assistant at the University of Otago, and a medical interpreter. So those are our panelists. Welcome again, everyone. You know, the wonderful thing about webinar format is that we can include so many in this kōrero from across the country and possibly even overseas. I'm not sure about that. I'm joining in from Hamilton, and you know, Rachel and Erica are both in Auckland. Maybe we should just start by asking the panelists where they're currently based. Which city are you in? Rimu?
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Ko Rimu Bui, tōku ingoa. I am currently living in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton.
Thank you. Nui?
Kia ora everyone, and thank you Priya for the introduction, and Rachel. I'm currently based in Auckland as well, so I spend my time between South Auckland and Auckland Central.
Kiara?
Kia ora. So I am based in Whangarei in a small town called Wantry Point. However, I'm actually in Auckland at the moment because my boyfriend lives here, so we're just here for a couple of days.
Right. And Zara?
Kia ora koutou. I'm from Christchurch, and at the moment I'm on my way to Dunedin for campaigning.
Right, so you're literally between cities. Yeah. Okay, let's get started with questions. You know, as the focus of our webinar is on ethnic women, you probably won't be surprised that some of our opening questions are going to be around questions of identity. And so let me begin by asking you about how you see yourself. Do you see yourself as ethnic, as woman, an ethnic woman, all or some of these? And why would you describe yourself as that? You know, what does that mean to you? And so maybe let's start by with you, Rimu.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's definitely been a lifelong but also ongoing journey into exploring my identities. I sit at the intersection of many different identities, as you mentioned, Priya. So it's definitely something hard to navigate in a city like in a country like New Zealand. I find a lot of the people around me and the establishments around me are Pākeha centred. So it can be quite difficult to acknowledge my heritage, but also survive at the same time. But yeah, at this current point in time, I definitely do identify as an ethnic woman, as a woman of colour. And I think it's quite important that we do acknowledge the labels of our identity, but also acknowledge that there is a much wider experience than just ours. But yeah.
Nubi?
Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Rimu. I think it's a really interesting one for me, particularly because I was born in Sri Lanka and then I grew up in Scotland. And so for me, and my parents travelled a lot when I was growing up with my sister. So we never really, I guess in some sense, we always view the world as just global, right? And everyone's just equal and everyone's comes from the same, you know, we all bleed red essentially. And so coming into New Zealand also has been fascinating in growing up and still identifying what that identity could mean and what it would actually mean for others. I think my name reminds me that I'm definitely not New Zealand, you know, Pākeha or of any other ethnic background, but it's fascinating how sometimes it's what others see in you that reminds you that you're young and you're female and that you are from an ethnic origin in some sense. And I think part of the journey, I think, is about reminding yourself of the values and the aspects of your life that you've inherited and grown up with that are still important to you and that you will live by. That's also very important regardless of the journey you step into in terms of your career or life.
Thank you. Sarah?
I definitely... Sorry, don't know what happened there. I'm kind of similar to probably Rimu, where I sort of sit in between, you know, you know, different identities in a sense, because, you know, I'm half white and half Filipino. And so I think it's it's difficult to really identify as one thing. It's not a simple answer, but I grew up in New Zealand for the most part. And so I sort of see myself as a Kiwi, but I think as Nui said, you're kind of reminded that you're not just one thing, right? You sort of, people see you in a certain way, and that is how, you know, you're reminded that you're not like everyone else, you know, for the majority of people. So yeah, it's still an ongoing journey, I think, for me. And I think because I grew up with not a lot of different ethnicities around me, it was, I find it hard to sort of identify with my sort of heritage, I think. And that's something I need to probably do more of in my life. But yeah, it's an interesting journey, yeah.
And Zara, sorry, there was a bit of a confusion in the sounding, in possibly my pronunciation of names, but Zara, what would you say to that question around seeing yourself as an ethnic or an ethnic, or a woman or an ethnic woman, or, oops, have you lost her?
I think her Wi-Fi connection might be quite bad.
Yeah, on the road.
Yeah.
Should we, maybe we can move on and wait for Zara to connect back. So I know that, I mean, for all four of you, I think 3 of the 4 of you came to New Zealand either as children or adults, and one of you, Rimu, you were born here but grew up elsewhere. You know, these cultural identities that you've spoken about, and the extent to which you identify with them or not. But do you think that these cultural identities have played any kind of a role in shaping your political identity and your political platform? Has it had an impact, and in what way might it have had? Maybe we can start with Nui this time.
You know, thank you. Possibly my closer family, I think, has probably played a part in terms of my political views and who I would align with most. So my mum's a teacher. She was a teacher. She was a special needs teacher. And she, you know, for her, she always saw the world in the lens of we're not all the same, we're not all perfect, but we all have something to contribute or have the ability or a gifting to bring to the table. So being very open, being transparent, but also being very inclusive, I think, was her sort of her mantra all the time, and still is. My father, on the other side, has been a businessman all his life, and he's built and sold businesses and done his thing. So for me, I've also seen him work really hard to build the life that my sister and I were able to build and lead, and the opportunities created for us as a result as well. And so those values combined for me was probably one of the reasons why I was very much right-leaning in terms of my views of the National Party, where as a party always stood around taking personal responsibility, driving hard work to be able to attain and achieve things, and being in, and ensure that you can give back off the base of what you've built, but have that clear foundation. And so for me growing up, it's always been that whole idea of there's no such thing as a free meal. You've got to work hard for what you gain and how you gain it and how you give it as well. And then my business, my own business, I left the health sector. So I studied, in fact, in the School of Population Health, Rachel. So I was out there in Tāmaki for many years. I first initially got into pre-med and realised I didn't want to be a doctor. I wanted to go into preventative healthcare. But I left health to start my own company based on my own passion to help young people bridge the gap between study and jobs. And seeing that firsthand as well, and empowering other young people coming through to realise their own potential has also been one of the reasons why I suppose I've aligned with the National Party, because I've seen what we need as a business owner for being able to build and create enterprise for the future, not of ourselves, but also for others around us.
Thank you. Zara, if this is a good time to bring you in, maybe I'll to add to that original question that you were about to answer, which is, do you identify as an ethnic or an ethnic woman, but also to what extent have those cultural identities had an impact on your political identity and your political platform?
Sorry about the disconnection. I do identify myself as an ethnic from the minority group. And when I look at my background growing up as a Muslim girl in this country, in Aotearoa, and also traveling around, I have obviously faced challenges as well, but my values, social justice values that I've witnessed my parents growing up, and you know, my parents always, no matter where they were, when we were back in the Middle East, I've always seen them, you know, watching them growing up, watching them helping and supporting people, even at the times that it was difficult to make ends meet, and caring for people around me, regardless of their background. And then coming to New Zealand when I was about 13, and also being exposed to the diversity of Aotearoa, and especially in Otautahi, and we're growing to become even more diverse in Christchurch. So that's what kind of leaned me towards the Labour Party, and kind of my life was shaped in a way to direct me towards this direction and the path that I am on at the moment. And because I'm always very passionate about helping people, connecting with people, communicating with them, listening to their concerns, trying to address their issues and speaking up for them and for their needs, especially when they're, you know, from minority background or from a disadvantaged background. And that's taught me a lot. And we are in a country that we can practice and speak up our thoughts, and, you know, be able to stand up for a political position at the moment, regardless of my background, is quite empowering to me, and also the people around me. And it's a great blessing for me.
Thank you. Remo?
Kia ora. Yeah, I just want to mihi to Zara for that. Yeah, I mean, my parents met in India. I was conceived in India, and then they moved back here so that I would be afforded the privileges of a New Zealand passport of being born in Aotearoa. This is something that a lot of my ethnic friends and mates have never been afforded the privilege of, so I do want to acknowledge that it is a privilege. But at the same time, I moved back to India when I was about a month old. I spent 13 years of my life living in a rural village with 10 other families. I grew up in a household that was Punjabi Sikh. My grandmother was a refugee from modern day Pakistan. She moved to India with her husband with absolutely nothing, lived in a tent next to a forest. I had 3 Bangladeshi refugee foster sisters. I had 2 younger brothers who followed Sikhism, so had long hair, had a turban. I don't think there's any way that my politics could be different than what it is now. I, from a very young age, had friends from every single culture you can imagine, every religion you can imagine. And it was not just the diversity, but the inclusion and the importance of inclusion and important decision-making practices that led me to where I am now. And I think that is a moral and that is a value that I will always stand true to, of not just the importance of being able to speak up and have your voice heard and have it represented, but also the fact that there are wrongs to be righted. Righted doesn't sound right. There are wrongs to be made right. I grew up with history textbooks that taught me all about the colonization of India and partition especially, and there was no way that social justice was going to be an irrelevant part of my life. You could say I was raised in it. So yeah, I mean, not only my family and my mates, but also kind of the environment I was in for 13 years of my life shaped me into who I am. And I think it does everyone, but especially for gender minorities and ethnic and religious minorities. It can have a incredible or a devastating effect on the rest of your life. And I'm very grateful to be in the position that I am in now.
Thank you, Remo. And Kiara, some thoughts on this?
Hi. Yes, so I would say my family weren't very hands-on with shaping my political views, and I didn't really have much experience, you know, thinking about this growing up, and I'd say that most people just thought I was part Māori at school. Actually, I didn't really grow up with a lot of diversity around me, and so I think values in terms of making sure that people are equal in terms of Māori people have been probably more in my mind growing up. And I went to quite a low decile school, so I did see, you know, people were asking me for lunch at some points throughout my school time. So I think seeing that made me kind of think about, you know, not everyone has equal opportunities in life, but it wasn't probably from a, in terms of people having different ethnic backgrounds necessarily. And so I started thinking about politics more so when I was in uni, and actually I was around more white people. I'd say I studied down at the University of Otago, and that wasn't really in my brain either then. And I was actually a young nat at one point, so I was doing that, but then I sort of radically changed my views. I think starting to be more part of different communities in Otago, I sort of swung the other way and started looking at Labour and Greens as options. Top sort of only came about last election cycle. And so I was studying public economics as a paper, and I was sort of learning more about the how the tax system isn't great in New Zealand for young people. And I figured out that the Opportunities Party came about and they were trying to fix that. So that was more my, you know, my value to try and make sure that we sort this tax system and make sure that people have, you know, equal opportunities in terms of economics. And, but yeah, so, I mean, our whole ethos is about equal opportunities, being the Opportunities Party. And so I think that will still be something that we want to give to people, right? To have equal opportunities, no matter what race, no matter what gender you are. If you're, excuse me, I'll wrap up there, Erica. Thank you.
Thank you. While we still have Zara connecting in, I'll turn to our next question. But, you know, thank you for your responses. I think what it shows is this incredible range of experiences and formative experiences that you have, each of you has had, and how that's kind of translated into the kinds of politics you have adopted now. So here is a related but still quite different question, and that is, would you say that you are a feminist? What does the word feminist mean to you, you know, and how does that sit alongside the identities that you claim? So Zara, shall we, if we can go to you first.
Sure. If you're talking about, you know, giving equal opportunities to women and everyone, I would say yes, because I am pro, you know, rights for women, wherever they are, whatever field they're in, because they deserve equal opportunities and equal pay and everything. So definitely.
Right. Okay. Nui?
Sorry, just unmute myself. I wouldn't say I'm a diehard, full-on feminist. I am one about equal opportunities. I'm about giving, regardless of age, gender, and ethnicity, and thinking, bringing that level of thinking. But I'm not one to just go something just about females in terms of getting on boards or getting, you know, a first preference job because you're female and you're looking at a ratio-based process or system. Some of the best people that have guided me and supported me throughout my life, even my career, before I set up my business, and then since, have been some fantastic male role models. And so for me, I think as women, I think it's important that we embrace those those male role models that do want to be a part of our story and our journey and have a lot to offer as well, particularly because they do bring a level of that diverse thinking that we as women won't be thinking things, you know, in terms of how they might make decisions or make certain calls based on scenarios. But I'm certainly not one to run around and say I'm a pro-feminist.
Thank you. Kiara and then Remo.
So similar to Nui, I think that we need to be able to embrace the men in our life as well and learn from them. But it is difficult because feminism has so many schools of thought, right? I've sort of gone through a bit of a journey figuring out what my kind of relationship with feminism is, because it is important to make sure that we have the equal opportunity and, you know, we aren't sort of, you know, seen as incapable of doing a role that maybe a man could do. But yeah, I sort of went in the wrong direction, I think, with feminism, because I sort of wanted to be masculine almost. And so, and that, you know, in certain roles, like, you know, being a CEO, you probably want to be more stern and aggressive, or that's sort of how you would see that. But I think now we're starting to see a shift in how, what good leaders are, and that's not necessarily being, you know, a strong, aggressive person. It can be someone like Jacinda Ardern, who leads with empathy, but is still with strength. And so I'm starting to try and embrace my femininity and the traits that we have as women that can bring, you know, great things in higher positions.
Thank you.
I just want to really quickly clarify the definition of feminism as is widely accepted in many dictionaries. So feminism, by definition, is the theory of the political, social and economic equality of sexes and genders. That is all it is. And I agree that there are many different schools of thought in feminism. There are many different branches, if you like. I consider myself to be a staunch feminist because I believe in gender equality and in gender equity. I believe that women have suffered an incredible amount through structures that perpetuate gender inequality, but I also believe that there are marginalized genders that are not within the gender binary who have suffered as well and continue to suffer. And I think feminism without intersectionality is privilege yet again. We need to be looking for the most vulnerable in our communities, and often they are the trans women, they are the black trans women, they are the black trans women who are sex workers. And until they have rights and until they are treated in the exact same way as everybody else, feminism still has a long way to go. So yeah, intersectionality is at the core of my feminism. From a very young age, I was taught feminism just means that people are treated at every single level in the exact same way. And I knew from a child that it wasn't true of the structures and of the groups that I saw around me, especially within religion and within patriarchal cultures especially. But I also understand that New Zealand is inherently patriarchal, an imported concept from, from England. So I think Indigenous people and especially in Aotearoa Māori, looking at the gender structures there, we have so much to learn. And I think a lot of disservice is done when we only look at colonized or colonizer understandings of feminism, that it's a lot broader than that, and it's a lot older and more ancient than that.
Thank you very, very much. I mean, thank you all for those interesting, fascinating insights. I'm going to hand over the asking of questions role to Rachel now, and away you go, Rachel.
Thank you all. That's been quite an exciting start. I was going to ask you what drew you to your chosen party, but I think that's already come out in the responses that you've given us. But let me add on a question to that. Is your chosen party, whichever ones that you're in right now, the best one for an ethnic woman? And why do you say that? I shall start with Kiara.
Kia ora. So I'm not too sure if we have the best policies. I'd probably say that the Greens probably do, I imagine, because we're still a small party, so we haven't really got a lot of policies surrounding that, but we would work towards having those policies for ensuring that everyone has the equal opportunity. But I do think that, you know, it is still a great party to be in the Opportunities Party for someone like me, and I've never really faced anything bad, you know, no, sorry, I can't think of words. I'll let you guys continue with the next.
Yep, that's for that. Remo, do you think, well, you've already had support from Kiara in terms of the Green Party and ethnic women.
Yeah, mihi to
Would
you.
you like to add to that?
No, absolutely. The Greens within our core policy believe and know that all people, regardless of their gender, should be respected for their innate human dignity, that everyone should be able to enjoy their fundamental rights and freedoms without discrimination. And we know that the systems that we currently have don't adequately recognise the needs of and experiences of women and gender minorities, and that's all across our cultural identities and our ethnic identities, but particularly our policies around, if we're talking about opportunity this evening, especially around pay equity and the strides we've made with that. It's absolutely a privilege to be able to represent a party that has fought so hard for pay equity and won many times over. But I also want to talk about a really interesting policy of ours that we have, which is to recognise unpaid care work and household labour. And I think that's so important, especially for people coming from different ethnic backgrounds, because we hold unpaid labour. So what I'm referring to by that is like cleaning, cooking, doing the groceries, a lot of what women are expected to do in our society. And it's to recognise that and to actually say, hey, that's still work and you deserve to be paid for the labour that you do. I come from, I've said it many times, but I come from India, and women are definitely the carers. They look after the family, they look after the household, and they look after the house in itself. So I know what a massive role it is and what a toll it can take. And I'm so proud to stand for that policy, because I know that we have so much further to go, not just in terms of opportunity, but actually recognising the experiences of the women of today. But yeah, it's a pretty good party for ethnic women, but women and gender minorities, definitely.
Thank you, Remo. Nui and then Zara.
Thank you, Rachel. It's an interesting question. I was just reflecting on it as you were asking the question, and I thought, I think New Zealand as a whole is going through a journey of dealing with the diversity that we're going with. You know, we're even just from a not just from a political perspective, but just from a life and a community's perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think the conversation around whether it be young, whether you be female or even ethnic, I think all combined just makes it even more of a, I guess, some challenges that are real, that are very current, that are very present, and or also an opportunity. And I look at the National Party and I think we are a broad church. We all come from very different backgrounds and experiences, and you know, even just age and gender and ethnicity as well. And from a ethnic perspective, I've never, I guess, walked into a room and felt like I'm different, if that makes sense. But I guess part of that is also just how I've always lived my life. I think if we all kind of sit around and box ourselves in a little corner and expect to be, you know, pinned in a certain way, well, of course, it's the only thing that's your only outlook in life, and that's your view on life. And so for me, I've always gone in with a sort of a blank canvas approach and gone, what kind of colour of paint have we got today to play with? And let's just roll with the punches. From a policy perspective, I think we've always been the party, and I've admired the party over the years for this, to work very closely with the Māori, you know, different communities and groups across the country, particularly around the treaty and the treaty settlements. You know, particularly during John Key's time, we were very aggressive around that time to actually support those Māori communities who are the most vulnerable. And then also from a health perspective, most of our policies cover that level of diversity particularly for ethnic minority groups as well. And one of the things we want to do if we are back in government on the 18th of October is reinstate the health targets, because what we have noticed over the last 3 years is the challenges around not being able to check those health targets and see progress, but also how much of that's been an impact, particularly for ethnic minority women and groups.
Thank you. Thank you, Nui. We seem to have lost Zara.
I'm actually here. Sorry, just
good.
needed to walk out. Yeah. Kia ora. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I actually strongly believe that Labour is actually very inclusive. I'm actually the only, if I'm not wrong, I am the only candidate that wears hijab, and I've never felt, othered or excluded in the party. And I, I've never been singled out by anyone in the party. At the same time, I think everyone knows that we have a big Māori caucus and a big Pacifica caucus, and everyone comes from different backgrounds. We actually have another refugee candidate, Ibrahim Omar, who's from Eritrea, and I'm a refugee from Afghanistan. And we have Māori candidates, Pacifica candidates. We have a candidate from Maldives. We have, a very diverse group of, candidates, which is quite resonating with Aotearoa's population, because especially with the direction we're going, as other candidates just mentioned before. And I'm proud to be representing this party. And, they've helped the ethnic communities. And we have, Priyanka, who's one of our MPs, who works closely with the ethnic communities, and also Honourable Jenny Salesa. So that's why I felt like I'm welcomed in the party, because of the people and the MPs, and also Jacinda, who's always been very welcoming and kind to everyone.
Thank you, Zara. Thank you all for responding to that question. I have a follow-on question from what you've just said. Undoubtedly, you're pleased with your selection of parties where you are right now. And yet, as ethnic women, you represent a wide range along the political spectrum. There are some of you would sit in the progressive left, and some of you might be seen as a conservative right party. Do you consider that's the right positioning for you? Do you see yourself as conservative right or progressive left? Do these have any meaning to you? I shall start with Kiara, and maybe then on to Remo and Zara and Nui. Kiara.
Yeah, so I would consider myself quite progressive, and I think it's important as ethnic women to be progressive, right? And so because we do, as Remo said previously, we do live in a patriarchal society, and it's been imported from, a patriarchal society in the UK. And so I think we need to ensure that we're bringing more to the table and ensuring that we do move towards a different direction. We can't just keep things the same if we want there to be opportunities for everyone.
Thank you. Remo.
I might say something that's a bit controversial.
Go for it.
I see it more as people who uphold the rights of Indigenous people, of oppressed people, and people who continue the oppression. And I definitely would position myself on the progressive left if that's what, the more social justice end of things is. But definitely, as far as I've seen and studied and researched in the history of the world that we're in right now, most of our problems came from colonization. Most of our problems came from wars and famines that were caused by imperialist invasions of countries, specifically within Asia, but also in Pacific as well. And it's incredible to me that any one of us candidates could be held up as an ethnic woman candidate, but we're not a homogenous group. We can't be just an ethnic woman candidate. There are so many things that feed into our politics and feed into our values, and I think that's really important to remember. It's always a shock to me when women of colour and ethnic women don't share my politics, but I'm sure it's just as much of a shock to them. So I think, in order to achieve gender equality, which I think is definitely a common goal for all of us, we can't leave anyone behind. And that's where I position myself.
Oh, thank you, Remo. Nui.
absolutely love what you said, Ramu, in terms of the homogenous group, because I think we all get clumped sometimes, and particularly New Zealand with, you know, a population size of 5.5 million people, you know, at the bottom of the earth, it's very easy almost and simple to do that. And particularly in politics, it ends up happening and you just end up ticking the box, so to speak. The other side of it, however, is, you know, colonization, and I think of countries, particularly in Asia. So when I grew my business out of Auckland, the first stop was Australia, and then Singapore, Hong Kong. And so I spent a lot of time in Asia. I lived in Singapore for 4 years building my business, and I only moved back 4 years ago. And what I look at, when I look at Singapore, I look at Hong Kong, I look at parts of China. What fascinates me is how colonization has been a massive opportunity for growth for those countries. And if I look at the people who are, in some sense, now the ethnic minorities due to, you know, I guess due to natural selection and population size and growth and immigration, it's also created a spur of opportunity for some of the younger people coming through, because they start to see the world more from a level playing field, when maybe 20, 30 years ago, you talk to their parents and they sort of say to you, look, we didn't even see this being a pathway, an opportunity for our children. From a party perspective, back to New Zealand, I would say we are, I'm very much a conservative right, which is probably why I wear the blue jersey. And I know growing up in the UK as well, much of a Tory and a conservative. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Zara, your response to the question.
Kia ora. I do definitely see myself as a lefty because I come from an oppressed background myself. Like our people have been colonized, and the Hazara, I'm from minority Hazara group from Afghanistan, so we've always had to flee our country to go to different countries as refugees, and then ended up being in New Zealand, which is a great privilege for me. So I do understand the value of, you know, having the progressive leaning in politics as well. So yeah, I think everyone else shared a lot as well about it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Zara, and thank you all. It was I would say a rather challenging question to respond to, but thank you for that. Well, I have a set of questions. It's different for each one of you, and I'll ask it so you get some time to kind of reflect on it while the others are answering. Nui, I'll start with you. Your candidacy in Auckland Central became news in its own right. What kind of message do you think that sends from the new National Party to ethnic young women? Zara, your question. You are representing Christchurch. Christchurch is often described as a monocultural, if a white community. How well do you think you would be representing Christchurch? And if you are elected, would you be the first woman to wear a hijab? And you mentioned this earlier just now. Would you be the first woman MP to be wearing a hijab? And do you think that New Zealand is ready to accept a woman wearing a hijab in Parliament, a visibly diverse woman in Parliament? Rimu, question for you. You identify as queer, disabled, as well as ethnic, multiple ethnicities. And of course, you have a strong environmental platform. Now, within you, you might probably find that these are integrated identities, but when you go into each of these communities, do you find that they are at odds? Go to an ethnic community, how do you find your queer aspect of you or your identity accepted, and so on with the other communities? Would you like to talk to us a little bit about that? And the question for you, Kiara, is TOP has a strong, as you said, it's a young party, it's growing, and it has a strong focus on structural inequality. But to what extent do your policies, your party's policies, take into account institutional racism? And I'm specifically interested here for ethnic migrants, ethnic and migrant communities. And how far do they also take into account a gender analysis? So we'd like to start with you, Nui.
Rachel, you have totally been stalking me online. Oh my God.
Confession.
Shocking. I don't know what you know more about stuff than I do, but I'll tell you what. Look, fair question and fair comment. Mm-hmm. I think the whole thing's a bit like when you're back at school, right? There are always a group of kids in your classroom that are always troublemakers, that will never ever go with where the tide's going, with what the teacher's wanting, with what the values of the school are, the mission, the vision. And like with any organisation, whether it's political or non-political, there's always those bunch of kids that can be troublemakers. And my response to your question is there are some troublemakers, and there were some troublemakers obviously through that process, which was what happened and why it hit the media. As far as I'm concerned, I've always also been one of those students in the classroom that don't deal with troublemakers and don't put up with that kind of crap. And you could be young, you could be ethnic, you could be female, you could be whatever. But as far as I'm concerned, the truth always prevails. And if you really want something, you've just got to stick your neck out and do it, right? I mean, I'm talking to an array of fantastic panelists who've had some very interesting life experiences and journeys that have brought us to where we are today. And I'm sure one thing we probably all share in common is we don't take a simple no for an answer, right? And so for me, I think what I've learned from that, but I think what I'd also like to put out there for other young female ethnic potential political individuals who are ambitious, but also anyone that's driven, is never take no for an answer and never have to deal with what I had to deal with. But you've got to be strong enough to know why you're in this game as well. So that's my one bit of advice to anyone out there that's considering or thinking about it.
Thank you, Nui.
Thank you, Rachel.
Sarah, you're next, I think.
Sure. Well, actually, with what happened last year in March 15th, I think a lot of people have become more open to accepting and diversity and inclusiveness, especially with the activities that I've been doing with women around Canterbury. And, talking about I'm just as Kiwi as any other Kiwi person, regardless of their background. I'm just wearing a hijab, and that's my faith, and it resonates my value, and it's my choice to wear hijab. And I think it is a source of empowerment for me to be able to identify myself as a Muslim wahine who's also a Kiwi. I grew up here, and I think we have a very probably big community of Muslims in Canterbury and also around New Zealand. So I think people are more accepting and becoming more inclusive in terms of accepting people from different backgrounds that look like me will wear hijab. And I will, if I get elected this year, I will definitely be the first hijabi Muslim in the parliament.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Grimu.
It's always difficult when you sit at the intersection of so many different and difficult identities. And absolutely, I hid my queerness for the majority of my life because I was afraid of being left out by my community, of being dismissed by my community, of all of my communities, if I'm fully honest, whether it's in this country or in another country. We have a long way to go to address the homophobia and the bigotry anywhere we go. I would say that it makes very little difference whether the community is ethnic or Pākeha. Homophobia is insidious and has found its way through colonization, yet again, I'll bring it up, through colonization into the communities that I'm in a part of now. But I only have to go as far as to speak to my Māori mates, and they'll talk about being takatapui and the understandings that were in Aotearoa long before any of our ancestors got here, to speak to that gender fluidity and that sexual openness with your sexuality, and that gives me strength. It reminds me that what I'm fighting is not the individual person, whether it be someone who doesn't believe that queer people deserve rights, or that the torture of queer people should continue, or whether it's people who think that disabled people don't deserve adequate support to live a dignified life. It reminds me that it's not just the one person in front of me, and that the fight against these oppressive belief systems has been going on for centuries, and I'm just playing my part in it, and my part in it is to to behave in the way that my parents raised me, to stand in their shadow of respect and inclusivity and diversity, and to know that what makes me different is a strength. It makes me proud that I can be a representative for young queer brown kids, for disabled people, disabled students who are struggling, because I know that there's so many more of us than can out themselves. And I've had to deal with an incredible amount of bigotry and hatred directed at me just in the last couple months. And I feel very privileged that I can still sit here and have this conversation with you. And that's because of the support that I receive from the people around me, but also the systems that I've been privileged enough as a light-skinned woman to be able to access, because I know that a lot of people in my communities can't access that support. So I believe it to be my responsibility to fight on their behalf. And that's why I'll keep going to those communities, keep having the hard conversations. I do it for the people who don't feel safe enough to do so.
Thank you, Remo. Kiara.
Hi, so yeah, I understand that most of our policies are around economic equity more than setting laws in other areas for being equal. But I will say that our universal basic income is rewarding unpaid work as well. And it can almost be seen as like if you think of the idea of a social contract, we sort of live in this world, we have to abide by law. And so UBI is almost like a dividend for, being in this world and abiding to that social contract. So I think that's a really cool concept when you think of the UBI, and it's probably the most fair thing that we have. Also, we are wanting, one of our policies is a democracy reset. So we're one of the only countries in the world, there's only a few of us, I think, that have an uncodified constitution. Most places have a written constitution. So we want to bring that up in the conversation again and actually write a constitution and figure out what our rights are as people. And so we don't have anything planned out yet, but we want to bring that conversation among all the different communities in New Zealand and write a constitution together and actually honour the treaty as well, because at the moment I think we sort of view the treaty as something that we can just claim, I guess, but the relationship is actually between Māori and Pākeha and honouring that treaty as opposed to just claiming it, I guess, if that makes sense. And so also our freshwater policy is trying to bring that conversation back as well, because no one currently under the law owns water, and that is quite problematic. And so we want to bring that conversation up again of Māori actually owning that water and, honouring that aspect of things as well. I think being a woman, an ethnic woman, I think one of the challenges is probably just people commenting on being, I think they just sort of view me as like a silly young woman. And I think that's probably the challenge. I don't know if that's necessarily because of my ethnicity. I think that's probably more to do with my age and being a female. After my Meet the Candidates events, it's I sort of get a lot of feedback being like saying nice things like, oh, you did well, or, really nice supportive things, but it also feels a little bit condescending, I think. And I don't think they would say that to me if I was an older male, even with the same words and things that I said in my speeches. So I think that's interesting. I'm sure most of these women here have faced that in their events as well. And so I hope that changes in the future. But I think just purely us representing our different ethnicities and being young women, just the pure representation is going to help the culture of politics and move us in a better direction.
Thank you, Kiara. There is a comment from the audience. Someone has written, Tautoko, treaties cannot be settled, they must be honoured. So that's
that was me.
Oh, there you go, Remo. I didn't see that. There you go.
Oops, but still
We're going to do another flip, Priya and I. Priya is going to ask you the next couple of questions before we go into Q&A.
So what a fascinating discussion. I mean, I just loved this. I wish we had another hour, but I know everybody probably has other things to do. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, ask you first a real quick yes and no kind of question, and then a follow on from that. So let me ask both of those questions together, and then we can take responses from each of you. So the yes and no question is, are you campaigning specifically in the ethnic community? Do you seek the ethnic community's vote, right? You individually as you campaign. And a follow-on question from that, do you expect ethnic women to vote for you, and why should they? So let's start with Rimu.
I think a huge part of my, sorry, I'll go yes or no. No to the first one, because I believe I'm campaigning on universal justice, so not across any particular lines. And I do expect ethnic women to vote for me. Yeah, because I think a lot of the things I talk about, there will be at least something in there that rings true compared to the other candidates.
Thank you. Zara?
I can't say yes, because I've been actually campaigning and door knocking at the same time. So, and I'm actually visiting the ethnic communities. So both, yes, for both of them, because I am part of this nation and I do relate to Kiwis as well. So, and I do believe they should vote for me because I share the same story of their challenges, you know, growing up, going through their identity crisis that we face as youth, and then eventually as, you know, adults, wherever we go.
Thank you. Kiara?
So I wouldn't say I've been specifically targeting communities in particular. I've just sort of been campaigning in a general sense, I guess. And for the second question, I'd like ethnic women to vote for me, but I do think that it should be based on whether they think my party is good for them. And I personally believe that our policies are the best policies to solve the root causes of the problems in New Zealand, and like what the housing crisis being one of the core problems and creating inequality in New Zealand and poverty. So that's one of the things that we want to solve. And I think that if they want to vote for Top on the basis of that and, you know, on our policies, I think that's, you know, that would be great. But I don't think they should vote for me just purely based on my ethnicity, although it would be nice, but it's, yeah, I think it should be based on whether you believe the party is the best party that you believe in.
Thank you, Kim. And the final response from Nui.
The answer is yes. I have been, particularly because Manurewa is a very diverse community, and there's parts of that community in locations that are more ethnic rather than Māori Pacifica. So I've been very targeted about that. And yes, I believe I'd be pulling in those votes and supporters. A lot of it's been from young women and young people. And I think it comes back to, I guess, some of the discussions we've been having today around how it's about those communities and people sort of also seeing us and going, oh, wow, if they can do it, I can do it. And I think part of that's the aspirational journey and I suppose almost giving them the opportunity to sort of stop and take a moment and think that they can do this as much as we can. And so I've been on a bit of a journey with that, and having with a background work in South Auckland as well for the last 3 years, particularly with high school students, I've been pushing that because I think that's where young people, regardless of the jersey colour you wear, can still be aspirational.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I did have more questions, but I'm looking at the time, and I think it's time to hand over to Erica, who has been collating the questions from the audience, and she will take over at this point.
Cool. Thank you, Priya, and kia ora. Thank you to everyone. This is so awesome, and I feel very emotional just even being part of this conversation. And from what I'm reading from the audience also, it's been a very energizing conversation. So one of the questions from the audience is, with rising multiculturalism in New Zealand, how do you think that bicultural principle of the treaty should be reconsidered? Because the person writing this question said that they do feel excluded at times from conversations around this as an ethnic person. Could we start with you, Rimu?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't lived in New Zealand all that long for my very short lifespan. But when I did first arrive here, I want to give a little bit of an anecdote. I was asked whether New Zealand had a culture, whether we were old enough to have a culture. And I just thought it was the most disrespectful question you could ask to a bunch of 13-year-olds. Of course we have a culture. We have the culture of modern day New Zealand, Aotearoa. But we also have a culture that was pushed down and suppressed through anger, through fear, through violence. And I'm of course referring to Mātauranga Māori, Te Ao Māori. And I think that's where the push for biculturalism came from. It was to not forget that there was a history here long before Europeans first arrived, or indeed immigrants first arrived. And I think it's really important that we do remember that it's not about dismissing any other identities or cultures or ethnicities, but it's about the fact that Māori still aren't treated in the same way that they asked and legally are required to be treated through Te Tiriti. And of course I believe Aotearoa is a multicultural city. It is an incredible country filled with so much diversity in all of our electorates. We can see this. I would find it difficult to say whether we should move to understanding or labeling us as multicultural. I think a bigger discussion needs to be had on whether the rights of Māori and the history of Māori has been acknowledged enough for them to be treated on the same basis as any other culture in Aotearoa. But that's just my personal opinion.
Kia ora, thank you, Rimu. Kiara?
Yeah, I think that's quite difficult in that, you know, it's kind of a different issue whether the rights of Māori have been adhered to separate from other ethnicities, I think. I do think it's important that we bring up the conversation of honouring the treaty because I don't think it has been adhered to throughout our history. And so I think our constitution, like if we write that constitution, we should definitely bring that in the conversation. But also, we do need to acknowledge the rights of everyone, all our ethnicities as well. But I think it's a tricky one to separate, like say it's a issue that should be joined together, because I think it is separate to try and make sure that Māori do have the rights as well.
Thank you. Nui?
Thank you, Erica. So when I think about biculturalism in New Zealand, you know, if you break that down at a sort of a definition point, it refers to Māori and non-Māori, right? And how the treaty was put in place from a partnership between Māori and the British Crown. And so for me, it is actually about bicultural competence, I think, whereby we as ethnic communities or ethnic women, as part of New Zealand's diversity and as part of our communities, actually recognise the bicultural competence in terms of whether it's language, whether it's behaviour, whether it's models of care from a health background, or ways in which we work together and function in teams, the role and place of people and their own iwis and their own groups. I think that's part of how I see it, and I think in New Zealand we haven't done enough of that. I think we're on a journey, but I think there's a journey that probably I would be quite keen to see us progress more, because with that level of inclusivity then comes a real form of honest diversity.
Kia ora, and Zara?
Coming from a different background and also growing up here and also not being exposed to the history of New Zealand, unfortunately, I strongly believe that we need to focus on biculturalism to be able to have a pathway to multiculturalism. Because once we understand the concept of biculturalism and acknowledge the people of the land, then we will be able to be open to multiculturalism. And ethnic communities are, automatically we're bicultural because we come from different backgrounds. Like most of us, like myself, we've lived in another country before coming to New Zealand. So we're kind of like global citizens. And we speak some of us even more than 2 languages. So I strongly believe that in order to be able to enter multiculturalism, we need to respect and acknowledge the biculturalism, especially the Māori culture. And then that will help us in leading towards a more inclusive society in a country as a whole, because especially the Māori values or the culture strongly resonates with people from ethnic communities.
Kia ora. Thank you to all of you. There are actually a lot of questions, and and Rachel and Priya, I'm not just saying that there are actually a lot of questions. So I'll just pick this one, and for the sake of time, it would be great if we could keep your answer to another minute. And it's a big question, so it might be a bit challenging to answer, but as ethnic women, what does equity mean to you? And we will start with you, Nui.
I think equity to me means a level of inclusivity and a dialogue around the table that isn't determined by being young or female or being ethnic. I think, again, I think New Zealand's got a long way to go on that journey. And I think to Kiara's point about, when we speak at debates or in conversations, people come up and say, oh, that was amazing, or well done you. And you kind of think, really? Okay. Thank you. But I think there's a level of, from an equity perspective, I think there's, whether it's pay, whether it's jobs, whether it's opportunities, essentially at a social but also at a life level, I think about that level of equalism, I think, for me.
Kia ora. Zara?
To me, it means having equal opportunity to access any opportunities that are coming for, regardless of your background, gender, ethnicity, whatever.
Thank you. Kiara?
Yeah, so I think in a basic sense, it is equal opportunities. And if, everyone had a CV and you didn't have anyone's name or gender or sexual orientation or anything like that, you would see that as face value and not, prejudge the person based on their certain ethnicity or gender. But that's difficult, right? Like, we do live in a world where we do see people and we do hear them, and we have to acknowledge that people have different identities. So I think we have a long way to go. I think it starts with a foundation with making sure that people have pay equity, I think, and have equal access to education and housing and all the basic needs that people need. And then we can start thinking about our culture as well. And I think that's very tricky, right? Because that even comes with pop culture and stuff, and seeing people that look like you and who have those opportunities in that way as well. And in sporting, it's so, a lot of things need to be considered, but I think just that the first steps, I think, are economic and education. Yeah.
Thank you. Rima?
Yeah, kia ora. It is a difficult question to answer, but to put it through the lens of being ethnic and being from a marginalised gender, equity to me means to be respected for my innate dignity as a human being, that I should be able to access support when I need support, that I should be afforded the same opportunities and experiences as my peers, and then I should be just respected on a base human level. And I think, like everyone said, we have a long way to go before we get there. And I definitely think that structural change first, so from government down, is one of the ways that we can fast track that change of centuries of inequity. And cultural change is a little bit more difficult, but I think it definitely comes from forming those strong communities around you where people aren't treated differently, where you're treated exactly the same as everybody else, and you're given the same opportunities, and to expand those communities outwards. But I think it needs to happen parallel, if not at exactly the same time. We're here as candidates because we believe we should be in positions of decision-making power, and that, you know, individually each of us believe that our way of doing things is the one that is going to create the most opportunity and create the biggest difference for our communities. And I think it's really important that everyday ethnic women align themselves with politicians and people in power who share those values, and who genuinely have plans and policies and structures ready to supplement or to change even the current structures we already have that just further increase gender inequity if we continue on that path. But yeah, in a very quick sum, to be respected for the only fact that you are a human being and you deserve dignity and support. And I'm very proud to stand for a party that agrees with that in every single sector of our community.
Kia ora, Rimu. Unfortunately, because of time, we have to move on. So I will pass back on to Rachel for some closing questions. Thank you all, and thank you everyone for submitting your questions. And if we had 2 more hours, I'm sure we will love to sit here and have quite a lively conversation.
I have to agree, there are a lot of questions, but I thought I would just read some of the comments that are coming up from the audience. An anonymous person has written, "It is energizing to hear the voice of the next rung of women leaders. Compliments to each of you." And there's someone else who's written, "Thank you, the conversations here are simply so valuable, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to share this in the future." Thank you, and this is from someone else saying, "Thank you and congratulations to all of you for fighting your battles to get to where you are as women of color." So with questions, there are also comments. Yes, these are the final questions before we wind up. I just thought I'd ask you.
Sorry, there's a fire alarm, so I'm going to exit.
Right, okay.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, yes, sorry, Kira, we're going to lose you. Oh, take care. To the rest of you, which gives you just a couple of questions. What are your emotions as election day approaches? Are you excited? Do you feel a sense of dread? You have butterflies in your stomach? What are you feeling?
I actually feel quite excited. Regardless of the outcomes, it's been a great privilege for me to be running as a candidate for the Labour Party. And I'm just wishing well for every single one of you, Wahine Toa. And I'm proud to be a part of this panel.
Thank you, Zara. Nui.
Thank you, Zara. Absolutely. I'm excited too. I think having the another 5 weeks added on was like, oh, it's another day. So reshift and re-gear. But I guess that's the world we're in today with COVID. And so I just have to say, super excited. And I just feel so humbled and privileged to be the first National Party Sri Lankan candidate in New Zealand. So I think it's always nice to get that first, but it's also, it comes with a lot of responsibility, and it's been a humbling experience. And what I love about it most is meeting people and hearing their stories. And this evening's been one of those parts of those things that kind of add to your journey. So thank you to you all.
And Rimu. Thank you, Nui.
Yeah, thank you to you both, and thank you to all three of you as well. I'm going to say something completely different and say, oh my goodness, I cannot wait for this to be over. Holy moly. Just being a student, as well as struggling with endometriosis, looking into the health system and seeing what I can get, struggling to keep up with employment, that's both those of my health concerns and my mental health concerns.
Remo, you've become a little muffled.
Oh,
much better now. Much better now. Yes.
Oh, strange. Yeah, I was just going to say that it's a really tough thing to do, to run as a candidate, to put yourself on a platform. And I'm lucky to have support, but it doesn't make the battles that a candidate faces any easier. It just means that you can survive an election. So I'm very much looking forward to this being over, and I hope to see representatives who will fight for my rights in Parliament.
What happens if you don't win? Do you plan to stay on in politics, or is this it? I start with Noe, and yes, Noe first, maybe.
Great question. I mean, I've got my business. I sit on a few boards. So a part of this is about, I guess, working out what the next chapter is, but absolutely, and possibly, I think what this has also shown me, and probably some of you here today, is how much of a conversation we need to be having in this country. And in order to be a part of that conversation, you've got to be in it. I've never been one to take a step back and complain or grumble about things. So I'd rather be in the forefront, hedging my bets and getting in there and getting stuck into it. And so that's kind of what gets me out of bed. Even during lockdown, you know, with campaigning in lockdown, it was a challenge. But I think politics is something that New Zealand needs more of, some broad, diverse thinkers to be able to shape that next 10, 20, 30 years.
Thank you, Noe. Remo?
Yeah, the personal is political. Politics is personal. For me, this election was just one step in my life, just one chapter, as you say, Nui. Like I've said earlier tonight, my life has been political just due to the nature of who I am and my struggles, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop. I spent 6 weeks at Ihumātao last year because I was invited to protect the whenua and to protect the rights of the people there, and I will no doubt find myself in situations where I'm called upon, and for me this was just one other situation.
Zara?
It's just the beginning of my journey, and I have a plan to do my master's in environmental management after the elections if I don't get in, and I will stay connected with the party and continue my support.
Thank you, Zara. And the very final question, a minute for a closing statement from all of you. Remo?
You put me on the spot. Okay. This year has been ridiculous in every single sense of the word. But I think what COVID has shown us most is that there are gaps in our society in the way people are treated and in the ways that people can access support. I myself experienced them, and I know how hard it is to access support in this country. And that's why I'm so proud to run for the Greens. We're at a point in time right now where we can lay foundations and build a future for all of us that is inclusive, that is diverse, with not only the people in it, but the solutions as well. And the Greens have a plan to make sure that we won't slide back to a system that puts vulnerable people at risk. And we know that a greener, cleaner and fairer Aotearoa is possible. And a bigger green heart in government just means that we can continue to think ahead by acting now. So I encourage all of you to look into the Green Party policies, look into our list. We have some incredible people, and I want to see them up there fighting for me and fighting for my rights just as much as I want to be there myself. So kia ora, party vote Green.
Thank you, Remo. Noe?
Thank you, Rachel. I just want to say, again, deeply humbled and privileged to be sitting here as a candidate for the National Party that is young, that's millennial, and that's ethnic as well, as a first timer. And I think what's really important and what's been quite a journey for me is coming back to sort of our culture, our values conversation, our identity, bringing all that a part of that and creating that part of our story for the future. And I think New Zealand's on a journey, but we have a long way to go. And so for me, this is about all of us. This is about our whānau and our extended whānau, and those who've just joined us today as well, to know that New Zealand's going to need, we're going to go through a transition period, particularly now with the COVID world, a post-COVID world, and what that new world looks like. And for that, one of the reasons I do wear a blue jersey is we have been the party that's helped us time and time again get through a deep economic crisis. And when I think about it from a young person's perspective, the challenges and the debt that we do have and will encounter, and the ways in which you spend that money coming through is going to be critical for our future. And so for me, it is about the National Party, but it's also about all of us as individuals identifying our own values as part of the overall party, and being here and being ready for New Zealand overall. So thank you.
Thank you, Nui. And Zara, close with you. I think Zara's Wi-Fi is perhaps weak.
Kira,
Yes.
thank you so much for having me. I would love to give every ethnic woman or any oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So one advice I would like to give to everyone here across Aotearoa or around the world, that always try and give yourself the opportunity or the chance to grow and be open to growth, to improve yourself as a person and also help other people around you. And we've had, with the Labour Party, in the last term, we've gone through the hardest times in Aotearoa, especially in Christchurch, where I am from. And we have had a strong leadership and a strong team that's been leading the country in the best possible way. And we want to keep the momentum and we want to keep moving. Thank you so much for having me on your panel.
Thank you all. That leaves me with the task of closing the session, thanking you all of you, each and every one. And I'm sorry Kiara's not here with us at the moment, for such an invigorating and energizing session. You let us, it's Priya and me and the audience, pummel you with questions one after the other, in which I have to say you answered with considerable thought, with sensitivity and with humor. So thank you for that. Personally, I would like to wish you all the best in the upcoming elections. And regardless of the outcome, I wish that all of you, and again, sorry that Kiara's not here to hear this, I wish that you will all stay in the space of politics. Your commitment to see positive change in New Zealand is just absolutely stunning and inspiring. There is so much hope to see who our future leaders are. And as a young ethnic woman, with all the challenges that it carries, you are still determined to forge a path in politics. And for that, hats off to you. You make us all proud. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We should do this again sometime.
Thank you. Totally.
Yes, we should. Thank you. It's been a fantastic session. And thanks to the audience as well. It's appreciate all your comments and all your thoughts, which we shall actually save, because I think they do deserve to be answered. We'll probably send it to the panelists at some point. You can see what the comments have been. Yep.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Pomarie.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.